A strange instance occurred just a few days ago, and I was reminded of it this morning. I have precious little time, but I wish to write about it while it was fresh on my mind. I was on my way to a hospital in St. Petersburg. I frequent hospitals quite often. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. And while I was there, I was in the form of a child. No one noticed me walk in. No one really cared. In hospitals, I'm not uncommon, so most folks barely acknowledge me until I've done my work, but then they notice. In any case, I made my way to a room where there was an old man waiting. He lay in bed, gazing out the window in his room. He glanced up when I entered, and he noticed me. Like I said before, there are moments where people who are prepared for me will notice me come for them. They see me at their doorstep, and they invite me in, or cling to their lives desperately, either or. I wonder what this man would do. I waited for a moment just to see. He smiled. "It's been a long time," he grunted. His thick Russian accent surprised me, but I was careful not to show it. "You didn't look like this last time." I asked him when I'd met him before. "I imagine at the time you were so busy you did not notice me. We met in Klen, 23rd November 1941. You took my brother right out of my arms." Damn it all. I suddenly remembered this man so clearly, as if I were seeing it all over again. The Battle of Moscow. Hitler's second attempt to take the city and his desperate offensive on Klen. So many dead in those days, so many souls to carry. After some time, I began to get lost in the carnage. But this man's face, I remember it now so vividly. I remember marching toward that broken-down building decimated by Panzer fire. Inside was a small squad of men. One of these men, half of his body ripped apart by shrapnel, his knee clinging to his femur by a few strands of meat. He was screaming in agony, not dead yet, and able to feel everything. The other man, holding on to him, his black hair matted to his head, struggled in vain to calm down the injured, dying man, speaking to him frantically and pathetically. I don't quite remember the words he said, but I remember as I reached down and took the screaming man's soul without a second thought. I was too busy to stop and pay my respects. I mean, it was a battlefield after all. I couldn't just stop. But I remember the other soldier look up at me. He saw me there, and our eyes met. His face went pale, and he began shouting the dead man's name helplessly, until finally laying him down, unable to do anything for him at that point. "You were the medic trying to save the man in that building," I acknowledged. "I was no medic," he laughed, "but the man was my brother. I was barely 23 years old, and my big brother died in my arms right in front of me." And here it comes, I thought to myself at the time. The guilt trip. I hear it all the time. How could you take him from me? It's so unfair. Why is death so unfair? It's just so cruel. How could this happen? These words mean nothing to me. Guilting me about the nature of my job is not only a waste of breath, but it's entirely self-centered. I carry hundreds of souls a day to the next life, many of which had no desire for me to come for them either. This isn't a matter of fairness, it's my job. When life ends, I arrive. Demanding I show fairness is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. Am I to simply make exceptions? Is one soul so much more worthy of life that I dare not touch it? How is that fair to the other souls that are not so special? Do you think I enjoy it? That I take pleasure in bringing pain to mortals? Don't delude yourself. You have my sympathies, and my heart does indeed ache for you, but do not dare try to throw your accusations of unfairness and cruelty upon me. I do my job, and that is all. Fairness is never a factor. Forgive me, I got off topic. Where was I? To my surprise, the Russian soldier did not guilt me or say those normal words about unfairness or cruelty that I expected. Instead, he smiled at me. "Thank you," he said. Now this, I can assure you, was a rarity. I cannot tell you how rare it is to ever receive thanks from a human. And yet this man, who I fully expected to hate me, was thanking me. I couldn't understand it. "For what?" I dared to ask. "You opened my eyes," he answered. "I have a story to share if you will permit me the time." I sighed at his request. I don't make time for people, but if they have any to spare, I humor them. "You have 5 minutes," I answered him. So the old Russian began his story. "When I was a boy, my father disappeared. I don't remember the reason. I just remember men coming one night and taking him away. I never knew where he went, and my mother didn't tell me. My brother swore that it would never happen to us, that we'd never be taken away like our father by Stalin's dogs. We joined the army because we thought it was the best way to avoid such an outcome. Stalin wouldn't dare phantom away his own soldiers, would he?" He didn't need me to answer that question. Of course he would. But I was too naive to realize it. As the Nazi panzers drew closer before the Battle of Moscow, 3 of our comrades had mentioned defection. It had only been in jest, the words of drunken idiots. But the word had spread up the chain of command, and 2 days later, they were no longer in their cots. The realization that nowhere was safe made me near close to crying, but my brother promised me we would never share that fate. We would keep our heads down, and we would die as men should. Die in battle defending what we love. "And so he did," I pointed out. "Da," the old soldier nodded. "But not for the country, not for the USSR. We wanted to defect, you see. Don't misunderstand, Angel. I love my country. I love the motherland, and I always have. But to love a country is not the same as loving its leaders, its ideals, or its plans. Had we known the nature of the monster that laid within Moscow, my brother and I would have left for America as soon as possible. But again, we were naive. The crime of youth. Then what did your brother die for?" "Me," he answered. "I was the one stationed on the top of the building as a sniper, to keep an eye on the movements of the panzers. I saw them coming. My brother grabbed me to pull me down, but in his moving to do so, he threw me down and took my place at the top. When the second floor blew off, he fell on top of me, protecting me from the shrapnel. You allowed my brother to die a warrior's death. You took him from this world without letting him live to see how shameful our country would become in the years to follow, and allowed him to die the way he would have wanted. You lived. Yes, I lived, with a fancy ribbon pinned to my chest by Comrade Stalin himself, and a permanent limp besides. The pig could not even remember my brother's name. Svalarchi. A list of all the soldiers who died serving his precious utopia, and he couldn't be bothered to glance at that list to offer condolences. Feh! That's all I could do not to spit in his face. I didn't know what to say to that. I thought about smiling at it, but I didn't need to speak. The Russian soldier spoke first. My brother protected me since we were children, and you gave him peace, letting him die in the way a warrior should, defending the things he loves. As for me, I am grateful I did not die, because I did not love the Soviet Union, and I would not die for it. My brother died for me, not the party. I see, I answered, finally beginning to understand his thanks. And now you'd like to see him again? I've waited almost 80 years to see him again, the old man grumbled. It has been too long. I wonder if he'd even recognize me. You'll know soon enough. It's time, I told him. I approached, and then he stopped once more. Do not take me like this, Death Angel. As the form of a child, do not pity me. Change your form to the one you took the day my brother died. Please, come to me as Valkyrie. I remembered the day I took his brother. I'd been in the form of a woman soldier of the Soviet Union. Women were not uncommon in the Soviet military at the time, and none were surprised to see me. There were rumors passed among the German and Soviet soldiers during that battle of a silver Valkyrie with silver hair that walked among the battlements. I can only assume they meant me. I granted his wish, taking that old form again. He smiled at it and closed his eyes. I took his soul into my arms as the machines around him squealed at his passing. I had no more time to wait, but I carried him out in the same form. But when I returned this morning to that hospital for another soul, I overheard a nurse mention that the White Valkyrie would claim this patient too. It amuses me that I would be so quickly remembered for so strange a reason. For so many, it is my appearance and how I arrive that people remember, which is where the Grim Reaper look comes from. But for this Soviet soldier, it wasn't how I looked that he remembered me by. It was his gratitude for what I'd offered. He remembered me with fondness, not with hate. A rare occurrence, and one I wish could occur more often. Sincerely, Death.